The heads of the Sinaloa cartel, the four sons of infamous El Chapo, made a startling announcement recently related to the production of deadly drugs that most of the country missed. As you may know, fentanyl has killed tens of thousands of Americans, many public figures, and has ruined the lives of so many families. Fentanyl is a cheap drug that is often mixed in with street drugs in order to reduce costs. Now, guess what? Under increasing pressure from the DEA and after a major sting operation, which saw U.S. officials gaining the highest levels of access to the cartel, the four brothers announced to their cartel members that they must stop placing fentanyl in their drugs, or guess what? They will be killed. Yes. Officials are unclear on whether this would actually have an impact on fentanyl and street narcotics. Nobody truly knows how far enforcement would spread on the matter, if it would be enforced at all. However, it is in many ways relieving to see people at this level in the cartel actively succumbing to pressure from the United States government, law enforcement. The real question remains, will we see a decrease in fentanyl deaths in our country as a result of this? I'm doubtful, but if this statement shows anything, it shows that these cartel heads are not as powerful as we think they are. The United States government coming for them? Yes. Whether they take fentanyl out of their drugs or not, we know the United States sent a very powerful message. Welcome to this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. Nizar Dahan is an MBA, holds an MBA. He's a political activist, award-winning humanitarian aid worker. And Doron Gorshein is Senior Vice President of Government Affairs. And we welcome them both to our broadcast. So let me start with you, Nizar. I mean, everybody has talked about the crisis in the Middle East. They talked about the savagery of Hamas and what they've done to the Israeli on that dreadful day on that weekend. But we also see what has happened with the recent explosion at the hospital where scores of people in Palestine has died. What perspective are we not talking about when it relates to this crisis and this war in the Middle East?
Firstly, thank you for having me on your show. My name is Nizar, as you said, Nizo. I think the situation that we really are overlooking as human beings is the human side of this tragic event, or these tragic events that have been ongoing for more than 75 years. Just some statistics so people are up to date from what's happening in Gaza. 3,478 people are dead. 1,500 of those are children. 320 of those are babies less than 3 years old. 15,000 people are injured. 1/3 of those are children. 1.1 million people are displaced from their homes. The World Health Organization says there have been 59 attacks on healthcare workers, killing 16, injuring 28. 4 hospitals are not functioning. There are 1,200 people missing, still under the rubble. That equates to one Palestinian dying every 5 minutes since October the 7th. 6,000 bombs have been dropped in Gaza over the past 15 days. That is more than has been dropped in Ukraine in 1 year. White phosphorus has been used on civilian populations. 473,000 Palestinians are seeking refuge in UN shelters. 3 desalination plants are completely out of order, meaning that there is no access to fresh water. So these are just some statistics that are giving an idea of the reality of what's happening inside Gaza now.
And wouldn't you say none of this would have occurred had Hamas not savagely attacked Israel for no apparent reason at all on one of the most holiest of days?
I think when we're
Where's the blame?
I think when we're talking about the death of children and we're talking about the death of civilians.
But what about the death of the Israelis that died? I mean, all children, the Israeli children that died as well.
100%, and I condemn the life. We all condemn the innocent loss of life on either side, regardless of their religion, regardless of where they're from, regardless of their color. But we have to be realistic and we have to look at the actuality of the situation. Palestinians have been facing this illegal occupation and the siege for a very long time. Palestinian children have been dying since 1948. We have to look at the reality of the situation. This is not justification for anything that has taken place. We condemn the loss of all innocent life. Anybody that is innocent, that has nothing to do with this issue, should not lose their lives on both sides. Yes, but we cannot look at the situation as if it only started on the 7th of October, 2023. This is an ongoing situation. Multiple UN resolutions have been violated. Structural violence used against civilians. They have been enduring attacks for as long as they can remember.
So are you justifying this behavior by Hamas?
No. If you just listen to what I said this is not a justification, but when we are talking about the loss of innocent life, we cannot only talk about that from one side. We must be equal, and we have to look at the whole situation. We have to look at the context of the situation. There is no justification for the killing of innocent people.
Let me get Nizar. Let me get Doron Gorshein in this. Doron, you're listening to Nizar. You're hearing his perspective. Your thoughts and your response.
The civilian deaths on both sides are awful, but Nizar talks about context. The context is very simple. One side is a democratic, peace-loving, respecting of human rights, respecting of freedom of the press, respecting freedom of speech, respecting plurality, and is a prosperous society with values very similar to those here we have in the United States. And the other side, which is Hamas, which is the sovereign in Gaza, and no Israeli has lived in Gaza for the past 18 years. There is no occupation. The Israelis, up until the terrorist attacks, allowed 20 to 30,000 day laborers from Gaza to come into Israel and make a living and come home and feed their families. We have to be very clear about who is responsible for this humanitarian crisis. You had an army that it's not an aberration. They were trained and instructed to go across the border, to rape women and drag them through the streets of Gaza for everyone to see, to kill babies, to kill children in front of their parents, and to kill parents in front of their children. They burned children alive. They took one pregnant woman, cut her fetus out of her stomach, and murdered them both. Now, Hamas knows that a civil society has no choice but to respond to this kind of thing with a ground invasion. And what Hamas has done, in 2005, Israel gave back Gaza to the Palestinians. They just exited with no preconditions. They uprooted Jewish homes. They closed down synagogues. They even dug up Jewish graves and transferred them to Israel. The hope at the time was that the Palestinian people would create Singapore on the Mediterranean. And instead, within 1 year, by 2006, Hamas had tortured or murdered all of their political enemies, dropped them off of buildings, and their reign of terror began. The Hamas charter, up until very recently, because they sanitized it, said every Jew must be killed. And this is exactly what happened at that music festival. The Hamas charter says if a Jew hides behind a tree or behind a rock, go and get him and kill him. And so what you now have is Israel having given the Palestinian people in Gaza, the northern section, 5 days notice to evacuate south of the Gaza River. It's 7 miles at its longest point, because the Israeli army exists to safeguard human life. Hamas, by contrast, placed a bomb on one of the 2 evacuation routes and blamed Israel. They blocked the 2 evacuation routes and prevented civilians from going south. And they ordered civilians to stay in place. They have their command and control center under Gaza's largest hospital. They have rockets in schools and in mosques. So there is a humanitarian crisis, but it's because, very simply, Hamas failed their own people. they dug up water pipes from under the ground that serve water to the Palestinian community to use it for rocket building. So
these are.
You have to be clear about where the responsibility lies. And Israel is going to do everything it can to safeguard human life. But we have to be very clear whose fault this is.
Nizar, before you respond to Doron, is there a mindset in the world among Palestinians and others that every Jew should be extinct from the world and they all should be killed?
I'll respond to your question first, and then I'll respond to the gentleman that just spoke.
Doron.
Your question, I'm not going to answer, because if you're trying to dehumanize Palestinians
No. I'm not here to dehumanize anybody. It's just a simple question. Doron just said that there is a mindset that all Jews should be extinct from the world. I just asked you a simple question. Is that true? You have a chance to debunk it and say it's outrageous. I'm just asking you a question, brother.
But of course it's outrageous, and I would really like it if these same questions were posed to the opposing side. But let's get back to what the gentleman said. He said that Israel is a protector of human rights. In 2020, Human Rights Watch, as well as many Israeli organizations, said that Israel oversees an apartheid state. If you're talking about human rights, when you're living in a country that people do not have their basic rights, there is no freedom of speech, there is no equal access, there is no freedom of movement for the Palestinian people. Now, you cannot say that we are promoting human rights whilst depriving a whole nation, a whole ethnicity from these very same rights that you are claiming. And I'd like to point out that this justification of bombing civilian infrastructure is something that we're all too used to. Hospitals have rockets, schools have rockets. This is the same rhetoric that we are hearing time and time again, and this is a justification. And I'm sure the gentleman will agree that the bombing of a hospital, regardless of whether warning has been given or not, is a very depraved act. Children.
Wait. Are you saying Israel bombed the hospital? Israel did not bomb that hospital. It is people on the actual ground. Even our intelligence sources have told us that was an accident. It was not intentional, but it came from the Hamas terrorists. It was not Israel. That's just a fact, Nihar. That's a fact, Nizar. We're not here to spread propaganda.
We're not exactly. So please stop spreading propaganda. Let me finish
please
my point.
Stop.
Yes, the same hospital that you're talking about was bombed 2 days before. Al-Shifa hospital in northern Gaza was bombed 5 days before. Hospitals have been consistently targeted, and the same excuse this very gentleman just said now is that they are used as hubs for terrorism. This is not real. This is not true. You cannot accept the killing of innocent people as a way to spread freedom or liberty. If we look at over the years, 2002, in Ramallah, 11 children were killed. A total of 192 children were killed in the whole of Palestine. 2004, 162 children were killed. 2009, 315 children were killed. 2014, 546 children were killed. And every single time there has been bombing in Gaza, it's been under the same pretext. Has any of this worked before? Is this a solution? Killing innocent people will not
Nizar,
bring peace.
I just want you to do this for me. I have to go to break because I appreciate having you and Doron on. And what I'm going to do when we come back, which is quite different, I'm going to have you and Doron talk to each other, ask questions of each other. I'm going to have a conversation among you when we come back after this break. I'm Armstrong Williams. Don't go away. And welcome back to the broadcast, where we're joined by Nizar Dahan. He's a political activist and an award-winning humanitarian aid worker, and Doron Gorshein. So, Nizar, I'm going to start with you. What question would you ask Doron? Talk to Doron.
Okay. Would you say that collective punishment, blockading food, water, electricity from a civilian population is a justifiable means to attain peace and safety?
That's a great question. And the answer is that the sovereign in Gaza is Hamas. Gaza is controlled by Hamas. Israel has a border to control and try to prevent the kinds of things that happened on October 7th. and the Israeli Navy is off the coast to try to prevent Iran and other actors from delivering weapons to Gaza, which obviously didn't work. In terms of supply of critical needs, up until October 7, construction materials and various items were getting shipped into Gaza, and there's an agreement now for water, food, and medicine to be delivered to civilians within the Palestinian territories. But we have to ask ourselves, why, up until now, up until October 7, was Israel supplying Gaza with water? I mean, Gaza is, there's no occupation. There's a border. You all call it a siege and racism. There's a border. The reason Israel and the UN and other actors have to provide food and water to the Palestinians is because the Hamas has taken all of the money that the Europeans, the UN, Iran, and others, the NGOs, have given them. They've taken all of the money and they haven't invested it in their infrastructure and in developing a civil society for the benefit of their citizens. Instead, they used it for tunnels and weapons and terror. And they've even dug up pipes delivering water to the citizenry and used them for rocket manufacturing. So I dispute the very premise of the question, which is that there's some kind of siege and occupation, which there isn't. We have to understand very clearly, Israel is doing everything it can to protect civilian life. Certainly Hamas didn't give 5 days notice to the citizens of Israel that it was coming. There was no notice. There was just slaughter on a level that we haven't seen since the Middle Ages.
Doron, so Doron, let me give you a chance to ask your question of Nizar.
Nizar, does Israel have a right to exist?
Yes.
Within where?
What do you mean within where? You asked me, does Israel have the right to exist? I said yes.
Where does Israel have a right to exist?
In Israel.
And what is Israel?
Be more specific to your question, because I know where you want to
I'll ask it very clearly, because the Hamas charter, by way of example, and interest groups say Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, meaning the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, which includes Tel Aviv, it includes Haifa, it includes the entire Jewish population of the state of Israel. Do you believe that Jews have a right to exist in a Jewish state within the boundaries of Israel today?
I believe that human rights for all citizens of that region should be upheld. I believe that everybody should have the right to political participation, to freedom of movement, to freedom of speech, to access resources. Whether they are Jewish, whether they are Muslim, a human being to me is a human being. And before 1948, Jews, Muslims, and Christians lived side by side in that region peacefully. I'm not saying that Israel shouldn't exist. Of course, Israel should exist. Israel does exist. But that does not mean at the cost of the freedom, the liberty, and the sanctity of the Palestinian people. There must be a peaceful solution that includes a sovereign state for the Palestinian people. When you are talking about Hamas repeatedly, when we look at the number of Palestinian civilians, children that have been killed in the West Bank, where there is no Hamas, what's the justification for that? We cannot go, we have to be realistic with the situation. Peace is the only solution. Nobody wants war. And when you're saying that Hamas charter says this, A, you're either implying that I am endorsing Hamas's charter, or B, which is more sinister, you're implying that the Palestinian people in their entirety are Hamas. And you're trying to make this link and relationship between them, which dehumanizes the Palestinian mothers, children, doctors, lawyers, football players, sports people that have nothing to do with Hamas. If you look at in Gaza, let's say on recent figures, there are 30,000 members of Hamas in a population of 2.2 million civilians. Are you willing to kill 2.2 million civilians to get rid of 30,000 bad people?
Doron, your response?
Well, I'll answer that question very clearly, no. And
So why is it happening?
A civilized person would want to see civilians killed. I don't believe that, and I hope that you agree with me. And I believe that the Israeli army has demonstrated time and again, as it will now, that it protects the sanctity of human life.
How can you say that when 3,478 civilians have been killed, 500 in each day, the number is growing? You cannot say that the civilians are being protected in a situation and a scenario where live, with footage, with information in front of us, we are seeing that civilian homes are being targeted. We are seeing that hospitals. 2 days ago, there was a bakery that was attacked. This bakery provides 100,000 people with bread. That bakery was bombed, and 2 innocent civilians died and 7 people were injured. Now, you cannot tell me that these are collateral damage or these are mistakes. We have to ensure that civilian life is protected, that children are protected. And
Nizar,
sadly,
how do you respond to Doron's assertion that it is the Israelis that take care of the people, the Palestinians in Gaza, the food, the water, and that Hamas, the leadership, uses it for their own personal gain and have little or no consideration for the people there? Now, you did say, should 30,000 people be blamed for 2 million? So maybe that may have implied your answer, but I just want to give you a chance to respond to something I thought was very earth-shattering, what he said, actually.
Okay, I like to stick to the facts in my discussion. So let's look at the facts. All of those statements that were made by this gentleman are not factual. There is no primary evidence to state this. This is just a rhetoric and a way, again, to dehumanize the civilians. There are people, there are doctors, there are organizations working in Gaza that have been for many years. And when you talk about it's not under siege, there does not need to be Israeli citizens living inside of Gaza for it to be occupied. Gaza is under complete occupation. What you call a border is regarded by all of the human rights institutions and the United Nations as the largest open-air prison in the world. 70% of the water, even pre this recent issue, 70% of the water is not fit for human consumption. Over 65% of the people of Gaza are unemployed. You said, yes, that some 30,000 per day or 250,000 or whatever the figure you gave go into Israel to work. Okay, but at the end of the day, where else can they go? Egypt is closed. As you said, quite rightly, the Israeli military and navy is blockading them from the sea. Even the fishing area that they used to have was reduced by 30 kilometers. By 30 kilometers in 2015 or 16. So you're talking about a densely populated area where people have no access to the outside world. People cannot go and travel to see their family. People cannot go and travel to see, to study abroad. People are stateless. The Palestinians do not have a state. The Palestinian people do not have a piece of paper to identify who they are and where they are from. There were over 1 million Palestinians that were expelled in 1948. There is a population of 10 million Palestinians living outside of Palestine today who cannot return, who cannot visit their family when their parents pass away or when their siblings pass away. They cannot go back.
Nizar, let me give Doron a chance to respond to you. Doron?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know where to start. The gentleman said all the statements that I made are not factual. Gaza is under complete occupation, even though he acknowledged that there are no Jews at all in Gaza. And that Gaza is an open-air prison. The characterization of Gaza being an open-air prison, I'll address this in the following way. One could say that Nazi Germany under the Nazi Party, that the Nazi Party did not represent the people. And we had to do everything we could to minimize civilian loss during World War II. But the fact is that Hamas is the sovereign in Gaza and has been for 18 years. And Hamas is a designated terrorist organization. The horror of what they did, live streaming execution and torture and rape of Israelis on their own cell phones to their own families, the horror of this, and knowing that Israel would have no choice but to respond. That is the duty of every civil society, just like it was the duty of the United States after Pearl Harbor to defend itself and to defend the free world. There was no choice put on the people of Israel, the government of Israel, and the IDF. And Gaza shouldn't be an open-air prison. Gaza had the Hamas done what Germany did and Japan did and created civil society and infrastructure and rights for their people after World War II, Gaza could be the most prosperous place on the Mediterranean today. No country has an obligation to open its borders to a place that is run by a terrorist organization. No country can be expected to not try and prevent missiles and weaponry from getting into Gaza by sea. And so this notion of open-air prison, had Hamas supplied its people with the things that any responsible sovereign who cares about its people should have done, but didn't do, then it wouldn't be an open-air prison.
Hold that point, because you know I have Victoria, Churchill, and Robert Patillo standing by to talk about Doron. To talk about what's going on with the speaker race, what's issues going on in this country. But we must come back with another segment here. This is a very important conversation with Nizar and Dahan because everybody's learning here. And what we want to talk about, not only solutions, but we want you to call each other by each other's name. Nihar, his name is Doron. Doron, his name is Nizar. Let's start there by acknowledging each other by their names when we return. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. You know, when we were deciding today's broadcast, you know, I agonize over these issues. And you see the death toll and the destruction in the Middle East, which impacts all of us. You know, for me, I've only presented the side of the Israelis because I make no apologies that I stand with Israel. But I think as a broadcast owner and as someone who has a platform like this, we should hear the other side. And while I don't necessarily have to agree with what Nizar Dahan has to say, I think it's very important that we hear all sides, especially when we're respectful and civil to each other. So again, Nihar is Doron, and Doron is Nizar. What are the solutions? Where is this going if we cannot find solutions quickly? I'll start with you, Nizar.
Thank you, Armstrong. I think the solution is very, very simple. As I stated earlier on, it's ensuring that everybody's human rights are upheld, ensuring that everybody has equal access, everybody is treated fairly with no fear of reprisals, no collective punishment. I mean, I'm very happy, Doron, that earlier on you acknowledged that you're using siege tactics, or Israel are using siege tactics to try and crush the enemy. And, you know, under Geneva Conventions and international law, this is actually what can be referred to as genocide and war crimes, collectively punishing a whole population because, you know, because you're trying to achieve a political goal. There's also another word for that. It's called terrorism. And, you know, we have to be clear when any innocent people are killed. I believe there is no justification for that. What you said happened on the 7th is despicable. It's disgusting. Nobody in their right mind would accept or agree or condone what happened to the Israeli citizens and the Israeli women and children. Of course, only a monster and an animal would be able to consider thinking that that is acceptable. But then we've got people like Ayelet Shaked, who I think it was around 9 or 10 years ago, said all Palestinians are the enemy. Elderly women, cities and villages must be destroyed, and we must kill the mothers of all Palestinian potential fighters because they are little snakes. we had a senior Israeli official only a week ago calling the Palestinians human animals. And we also had several high-ranking Israeli officials calling for the destruction of the whole of Gaza, wiping it out. Now, these are heinous crimes, and I believe that violence only begets violence. And when we talk about a solution and peace, which I'm sure is what you want, and because I know it's what I want, and the majority of good, moral, compassionate, caring people on earth want, then we have to stop trying to use violence. How many times has Gaza been bombed since 2008? Over 7,000, not including this year's attack. Over 7,000 Palestinians were killed, murdered, butchered. Civilians we're talking about now. Like, don't get me wrong. If this was a conflict where the two opposing sides are fighting and they have the same capabilities, then you can call that a war. But you cannot call this a war. Bombing civilians as a reprisal for what a small minority group that does not represent the rest does is a very worrying thing. And I fear that if this mind frame continues, then peace is going to be very difficult. And obviously we all want peace. We want the children to be safe. The main thing.
Doron, your response to Nizar in terms of solutions?
I'd love to have some kind of common understanding, but the very premise under your statements, somehow representing that Israelis want Palestinian mothers killed, and look, at this stage, given
she said
that,
I'm quoting you. Sorry to interrupt. I don't like interrupting, but I'm quoting it.
I didn't interrupt you.
Sorry.
At this stage.
But Doron, his point is, in all fairness, he did not say that. He was quoting what the leadership stated. It was not his quote. But go ahead, Doron.
I understand, but he represents that somehow as reflective of, and I'm not even sure that that it was ever stated. I think what you have to take into context is that you just have you had a terrorist organization that murdered more than 1,500 Israelis and maimed thousands in the most brutal way. And you have the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is really Hamas, saying the bombing was Israeli, which was factually untrue. The gentleman repeated that factual untruth here on the show. We have to be skeptical of anything that comes out of Hamas as a terrorist organization. By the way, the New York Times, Reuters, AP all ran with the headline that Israel bombed and was the responsible party of this bombing. And so I think the American people need to be skeptical of anything that comes out of the Hamas side.
But Doron, what we're trying to get to are solutions now.
Well, let me respond to that.
Thank you.
Number one, Hamas has to be eradicated. It cannot be the sovereign in Gaza anymore. Without Hamas, Gaza can be a prosperous destination on the Mediterranean. And I think after everything is completed, and I think we're looking way down the road, there's going to have to be a reconstruction effort that the international community assists in. However, if you're asking me what is the root cause here, in schools, Hamas teaches children a certain thing, and that's to hate Jews. Hamas runs, it's documented, you can research it, summer camps that teach children how to murder Jews. Until we reform control of the educational system and what children are taught in Gaza, then replacing the sovereign by itself is not going to be enough. If the Israelis laid down their arms tomorrow, there would be no Israel. If the terrorists laid down their arms, there would be peace.
So, Nizar, do you agree with Doron's assertion that Hamas must be eradicated, that small minority?
As I said earlier, I condemn the loss of life on all sides, and I will not be roped into talking about one side only whilst ignoring things that happen on the other side.
Well, should the extremists on both sides be eradicated?
Extremists everywhere should be eradicated, 1,000,000%, because extremists are a threat to peace and safety in the world. We know this. I am a frontline humanitarian aid worker. I was in Mosul in Iraq in 2016, 17, 18, and 19, whilst the fighting was going on. We had an attempted bomb attack on us by ISIS. A bomb dropped 375 meters away from me and my team, delivering frontline aid and support. I know about terrorism.
Nizar, I am hopeful that we can continue having this dialogue on this platform. I really appreciate you're joining us. And Doron, it's always a pleasure to see you. When we come back, Robert Patillo and Victoria Churchill will talk to us about what's going on with the Speaker of the House and other news that's going on around the world. Thank you both so much for joining us, and I appreciate the respect and the civility in this conversation. We need that example always, and we'll be back.
Thank you.
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. We welcome one of my favorites, Robert Hilliard Patillo. It's always good to see you, Robert, civil rights attorney and radio host, and Victoria Churchill, conservative writer, editor, commentator, speaker for Young Voices. We welcome you both to the platform. Well, Jim Jordan on Thursday announced that he will no longer seek the Speaker of the House. The Democrats, along with Hakeem Jeffries, have signaled that they will give Patrick McHenry, who is the pro tempore of the House now, more powers. And my assumption, Victoria, if they're going to give him more powers, there's just no way in the next month or few weeks that we're going to have another vote on the Speaker of the House. They're going to eventually make him Speaker of the House because the Democrats have made it clear, based on what their minority leader said, this is someone they can work with. But they said under no conditions would they have worked with Jim Jordan.
Absolutely. I mean, what we've seen from Washington this week is an absolute mess, and it's made it so that we as a nation cannot respond to the needs of some of our greatest allies. You know, the crisis in Israel and in Gaza, the U.S. has ended up on the back foot, partially because of everything that is going on Capitol Hill. You know, I want to say that I believe that the response from the Biden administration has been weak. But obviously, we have three branches of government. The legislative branch can't put pressure on the executive branch to do more to our number one ally in the Middle East when there is such dysfunction within the halls of Congress.
Robert Patillo, what did it say to you when former Trump lawyer Sidney Powell pleaded guilty in the Georgia election case?
Well, this is just step one. I think when these initial indictments were announced, I said that more than likely, probably 2/3 of these people end up taking plea deals in this case. So Sidney Powell, along with Ken Cheeseborough, will more likely take plea deals. People like Jenna Ellis and many of the other lower-level attorneys will be taking plea deals in this case. I've tried RICO cases in Fulton County. I've tried RICO cases against Fine and Willis in Fulton County. This is how they work. Their entire goal is to work their way up to the head of the criminal syndicate. In this case, being Donald Trump and some of the other attorneys at the top of the chain, like John Eastman. And I think we're going to see many more plea deals taking place until there's finally a point in time where President Trump will either have to go to trial knowing that the majority of his co-defendants will be testifying against him, or himself also take a plea deal, which will carry a mandatory minimum of 5 years in prison.
You know, Victoria, it was stated this week in terms of the economy that the inflation numbers were manipulated, and it's much higher and much more devastating than what many Americans were led to believe.
You know, I think that no matter what the numbers say, it's all about how people feel. They're looking at gas, which has doubled. They're looking at interest rates that have tripled for something like a mortgage. Their credit card bills get higher and higher every single month. So I think no matter what top-line analysts believe, this is an issue that is at the dinner table of every single person in America. Every time they wake up in the morning, they pull out their phone, they check their bank account, their check gets deposited. It's basically disappeared because of the effects of inflation that we are seeing. And this is an issue that is top of mind for most voters. In polling, this issue is split up. Typically, jobs in the economy and then inflation are kind of sussed out as separate things that people are asked about. But if you take those two together, those are issue number one and number two on the minds of the American voters. And I think as they go to make electoral decisions, whether that's here in Virginia in the next few months, whether that's next year for the Senate, for the House, for the presidency, voters want an out, and they want somebody in power that is going to stem the flow of everything that they are bleeding, right? Their bank accounts are bleeding. The amount of excess money that people have in reserves is at historic lows, and there is nothing. People are looking for a way out. They're looking for a lifeline, and so I think that's going to impact their electoral decisions moving forward.
Robert, you're a civil rights lawyer, and I know you are a strong advocate of free speech. And I know you've followed the stories with many Americans who have been out on the front lines protesting from Harvard to Brooklyn to Manhattan, all across the country in support of Hamas, and how the marketplace has responded. Giant corporations have rescinded offers as lawyers and clerks that they would not hire them. And obviously, the marketplace should make that decision. But how do you respond? And let me tell you why I raise this. You know, I don't know if many of those young people realize that even when Hamas attacked Israel at the festival, there were Muslims, people of all kinds of faith that were killed. They didn't care about whether you supported Hamas or not. And even in America, I mean, the fact is that to them, they are Americans. I mean, not Hamas sympathizers. And so it just baffles me that we lack the understanding to realize that people see us as Americans. We go, they don't separate us according to whether we decide to embrace their movement, whether we have a misunderstanding of it or not.
Well, one, the majority of these protesters are pro-Palestinian protesters, not pro-Hamas protesters. Hamas is not the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are not Hamas. It's a very important distinction I want people to make. And I find it ironic that these same conservatives were against cancel culture, who said, well, why is it I'm getting fired from my job for making anti-BLM statements? Or why is it that I have to be pro-trans or pro-LGBTQ, et cetera? The same people making those arguments are the same ones supporting retributive actions against progressives who are standing up for the human rights of the Palestinian people. I don't think anyone should lose their job based on their political beliefs. That's the entire concept of having free speech within a system. I don't think anyone should be afraid, or that we have thought police where people should not be able to express their opinions. I said the same thing during the council culture craze of a few years ago. I'm saying the same thing right now on this side.
I got to interrupt you.
It has to work on both sides.
I got to interrupt you a minute, because you know what's fascinating about this is that many of these people are liberal New York Jewish business owners who are outraged that many of these people are supporting Hamas in this protest, and they're advocating the cancel culture. It's not just conservatives, Robert. It's not.
Again, no one is supporting Hamas. It's about the Palestinian people. Over 3,000 Palestinians.
And you don't think these CEOs are not intelligent enough to understand this? You don't think they understand it? Of course they do.
It has to be understood that we're talking about the needs of the Palestinian people. Children who are being killed on the Gaza Strip. Women who are fleeing. People. There was a convoy that were told to leave the north of Gaza and go south, and the convoy was hit, killing 70 people. We have to understand that we have to stand up for human rights around the world, regardless of political belief, but regardless of race or religion or belief system, because once we lose the moral high ground to stand up for the human rights of individuals, well, then when Americans are in that similar situation, we can't appeal to the human rights of other groups. So it's not about being pro-Hamas, it's about being pro-human rights of the Palestinians, and we should not have a system in place where people have to basically shadow or shelter or not be allowed to express their opinions or their disagreement. Those are the exact thought police that conservatives have said they want to fight against. And I think everyone should be standing up for the rights of individuals to express themselves, get these things into the global public square, and come out with better policies around it.
But the problem, Victoria, is, yes, they are standing up for the Palestinians, and he says they're not pro-Hamas, but they're saying nothing about the number of Jews and others who died in Israel. It's one thing if you can balance it. I say, yes, I support Palestine, but what about the innocent Jews who lost their lives simply because they're Israelis?
All blood that has been shed in the Middle East, whether that's within Palestine or within Israel, is squarely upon the hands of Hamas. And the statements that some of these organizations on college campuses have put out do the complete opposite. They put the complete blame on Israel. And that is just a very, very niche ideology that is being spread in institutions such as the media and on college campuses, elite institutions that do not reflect the views of the majority of Americans. Polling came out just this week saying that over 70% of Democrats, over 80% of Republicans, and over 70% of independents believe in Israel's right to exist and defend itself against instances of terror. And that is exactly what Israel is doing. Hamas is a bad actor. They are not representative of the Palestinian people, but none of these groups are condemning them. And so what we are asking is for these people to condemn them, because all of the bloodshed is squarely on their hands. As your previous guest mentioned, if the Palestinian people, if Hamas, not the Palestinian people, those are two very different organizations, groups of people. Hamas is an extremist actor within their own government, and they are the government within Gaza, but they are not even the government within the majority of Palestine, including the West Bank. That is President Abbas, who is the leader that is internationally recognized. But what we see here by these people that are going out making these statements is an embrace of a very fringe ideology that is not embraced by a majority of Americans, or really a plurality of Americans, or of people within Israel. Israel, even though it is founded as a Jewish state, it is a home to Muslims, Christians, Arabs, and all of those ideologies are kind of cross-pollinating, right? You have Israeli Muslims, you have Arab Israelis that practice a variety of different religions. There was a photo that I saw that really kind of showed exactly how advanced and multicultural Israel is as a nation, is that there was IDF soldiers. One of them was praying with a Star of David, and one of them was praying with a Muslim prayer mat.
You know, that's some very good insights, Victoria. You know, Robert, what did President Biden accomplish by going to Israel earlier in the week? And let me just tell you, Biden has been his best when it comes to the moral clarity, his solidarity with Israel. I just think it's one of the finest moments of his presidency.
You're absolutely correct. And I think what President Biden did is something that we've never seen a U.S. president do, which is we've had wars and we've had terrorist attacks, we've had battles between Israel and Palestinians and Syria and Egypt and all the Middle Eastern states for the better part of half a century or 3/4 of a century at this point in time. President Biden is the first U.S. president to get on an airplane and go to Israel in a time of war, to stand up in complete solidarity with the Israeli people against terrorist attacks, but also to call for a two-state solution from Jerusalem, to recognize the right to livelihood and the right to live and the humanity of the Palestinian people, to stand up and work with with our friends in the Middle East, to work with President Sisi in Egypt to create a humanitarian corridor, to stop the suffering and the siege on Gaza, to allow water, food, aid, fuel to get into the people who are not involved in the Hamas attack, but also to guarantee to the Israelis that our special forces, our intelligence agencies will be working to free those hostages, both Israeli and American, who are being kept by Hamas. This is the image that I think the American people need to see. Just think about the image in the eyes of the average voter. When you see the President of the United States standing shoulder to shoulder with our greatest ally in the region, and then you flip back to the next channel, and back in Washington, D.C., the Republicans can't get a Speaker of the House. Then in New York, you have the former president outside of his trial for fraud. Then down in Atlanta, you have the president's former attorney pleading guilty and taking a plea to testify against him. This is the contrast that the American people see: a president showing real leadership in a time of war and a time of international danger, versus another party which is simply trying to keep themselves out of jail.
You know, I want to thank all of our guests for joining us on today's broadcast. And it is obvious that within Jim Jordan's own ranks, that browbeating, bribing, and threatening to primary someone can only work so far. I mean, the Republicans were really just turned off with the tactics, the bullying tactics that were used. And so Steve Scalise didn't make it, Jim Jordan didn't make it, but I will tell you, Patrick McHenry is a person as I said earlier, that crosses the aisle. Don't be surprised if he is the next Speaker of the House. Thank you all so much for joining us, for your input. Thank you, WJLA 24/7 and Howard Stark Holdings, and your great contributions to this broadcast. Enjoy the remainder of your weekend. I'm Armstrong Williams.